The second Sunday of Easter. The Sunday after the big show. Where did everybody go, right? Last Sunday, this was the place to be. Every church was. This Sunday, the crowds thinned out a little bit. I wish everyone who was in church last Sunday was back today, but we know how this goes. Easter is a day with joy and flowers and a parade of pastels and oh so many people. And the story that Jesus is risen. The Sunday after Easter. Well, it's the letdown and the smaller crowd and the story of doubting Thomas. We often call Thomas Doubting Thomas, but he was actually just realistic Thomas. I guess that doesn't have the same ring to it. But realistic Thomas just wanted to have the same experience the other disciples got to have, to see the risen Jesus face to face. But he didn't get to see the risen Jesus face to face. Not at first. He wasn't there. He left the building when Jesus came to them on that first day of the week, the day of the resurrection. And so Thomas wasn't there to see and believe. But Jesus came again. 1 week later, the next Sunday, and then and there, Jesus gave Thomas exactly what he needed to believe. There's lots of amazing things about this story. Jesus shows up and shows the disciples his wounds in his hands and his side. You see, the risen Jesus still was in the community. And that's where he came to believe. A friend of mine who's Jesus still declares peace to his disciples, his church, who are always in need of this gift of peace in the midst of the chaos around them. And Jesus sends and goes with his followers out to do the work that he began so long ago. The work of bringing God's favor, God's grace, God's love to those who need it. This is good news for all believers who gather together this day. But for those who may not be here, who may be missing out, those like Thomas, there is good news too. And that is that the Lord who came to Thomas to give him what he needed to believe desires to come to them, to come to all, so that they too can know again their Lord and their God. I believe that happens here and in every community of faith and doubt that gathers as the church during these Sundays after Easter. And so, who are those Thomases? Who are they? Let us proclaim to them, we have seen the